All right, this next section we're going to cover the drag rudiments. That includes the ruff, drag, double drag, lesson 25, dragadiddles, drag paradiddle number 1, drag paradiddle number 2. We've got single Ratamacues, double Ratamacues, and triple Ratamacues. The backing tracks, we're going to take you several different places. We're going to play some of the grooves I was playing there, including reggae. We're going to go down to Jamaica, play some reggae. We got hip hop. We're going to go down to Argentina for some tango. Over to Spain, some flamenco music. Then we're going to go to Cuba and Africa as well. All right, so we're going to start with the ruff. You ready? Drag rudiments. Now we're going to talk about ruffs and drags. And I'm going to try and clear up some confusion for you. On the list of 40 rudiments that PAS has out, they call a ruff a drag, and a drag tap. When actually, a ruff is a ruff, and a drag is just simply a drag, not a drag tap. Okay, a ruff is similar to a flam. A flam has one grace note and a primary note. A ruff has two grace notes and a primary note. The spacing of those grace notes is going to depend on several things. Number one, the tempo. Most of the time, if you're playing them fast, you can play the grace notes as 30-second notes. But if they're slow, they're actually going to be faster than 30-second notes. This will become obvious as you're playing through the tracks. As you'll notice in tempo 1, with all the ruffs, the grace notes are a little closer together. And then on tempo 2, a little further apart, and then tempo 3, tempo 4, they eventually turn into 30-second notes. Now this notation, there's a modern notation and what we call an old school notation. If you look at exercise 3 in lesson 10, you see the grace notes written out. But in exercise 4 of lesson 10, you see slashes. The slashes mean you divide that note in two. So a 16th note becomes a 30-second note, regardless of the tempo. When you have two grace notes written, the interpretation is left up to the player. The drag is simply a ruff plus a tap. I'm going to demonstrate by playing exercise number 3. This is a drag, but it may also be called a drag tap. This notation, the old school notation and the new school notation, is presented throughout all of the drag rudiments. So be aware of the diddle interpretation as you're going along. It may change if it's written as grace notes, depending on the tempo. If it's not, if it's written as a slash, it stays consistent regardless of the tempo. Now I'm going to play the etude in lesson 10, which includes ruffs and drags, in various different ways, as triplets and in duple form. Okay, I'm going to play this at tempo 4. All right, next thing we're going to talk about is lesson 25 and the drag paradiddle number 1. And that's lesson 11 in the book. Now lesson 25, you might be asking, why they call it lesson 25? It's on lesson 11. It's called lesson 25. It's got its name because it is in a book by Gardner Strube called The Drum and Fife Instructor. And it was the 25th lesson, so that's what we call it now. I'm going to go ahead and play the etude at tempo 5. now we're going to move on to Ratamacues. This is one of my favorite rudiments. We're going to talk about the single Ratamacue and the double Ratamacue. A single Ratamacue, like in exercise 1 on lesson 17, is simply 2 grace notes and then a triplet. A Ratamacue, a Ratamacue, a Ratamacue. A double Ratamacue is typically in a 6/8 feel and has 2 ruffs prior to the triplet. If you look at exercise number 2 in lesson 17, we start with the accent. So it goes like this. All right, various parts of the Ratamacue can actually land on the downbeat. And you can also, we're going to be a little more creative and accent the different parts of the Ratamacue. So I'm going to play exercise number 3 of lesson 17. That's a single Ratamacue, but the accent's going to shift around. And at one point, the accent even lands on the diddle. But let me warn you about playing accented diddles. Don't play them too hard. Think of the accent more like an emphasis. So when you play the diddle, if I play it too hard, it becomes crushed and the spacing isn't even. All right, here's lesson 17, exercise number 3 at tempo 4. All right, we're going to move on to lesson 21. We're going to talk about double and triple Ratamacues. I love the Ratamacues, you know. So there's a couple things I need to discuss in the etude. Number 1 is the 7/8 time signature. We talked about earlier how 8th note is equal to 8th note. Well, the same thing here, but you can think of it as 16th note equal to 16th note. The downbeat stays the same on the first 2 counts, and you go from there. Once again, if you have problems with these transitions, just listen to the tracks and you'll get it. There's one other thing in this etude that we haven't seen yet, and that's a buzzed diddle. In the very last line, you have Z's on the stem, okay? And that's just a press. So the Ratamacue, it's actually single Ratamacues there, are going to be played like this. And in the second to last measure, or the last measure of the etude, excuse me, the accent is on the buzz. So I'll play the last 2 measures of the etude on the pad. It goes like this. All right, it's time for Dr. Throwdown to get serious. I'm going to play lesson 21 etude at ludicrous speed. That's tempo 7. Let's go, boys.